a look at life on the home front. So we're going to take a look at what is happening in the United States during World War II while the soldiers are off in Europe and the Pacific fighting in the war. What's going on here at home? So that's what we're going to discuss today. Here we go. All right, so anything orange obviously is going to be highlighted. So as the men went off to war, there was a huge labor shortage, and so women started to fill in the roles in the factories and other workplaces. So Rosie the Riveter, which is this lady right here, she kind of became the symbol of this. Okay, so she was a character from a popular song, and like I said, became the symbol for this campaign to hire women. You can see that she's featured in this poster. And during this time, about 2.5 million women entered the workforce. So women who were no longer, housewives and had other jobs, or who had worked from the home, they started to go into the workplace. A lot of factories did resist this and resisted hiring of African Americans. So A. Philip Randolph was the head of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, which was a major union. That's this guy right down here. And he's going to take action in order to try to get more factories to hire African Americans. So he's going to inform Roosevelt of his plan to organize a march on Washington in order to secure jobs for African Americans. And then in reaction to this, FDR, on June 25th, 1941, FDR is going to issue an executive order that basically said that there can be no discrimination in the employment of workers in defense industries or in government. So you cannot discriminate based on race, gender, anything like that. In anybody who has a government contract or actually is in the government. Okay, so this does not necessarily apply to private businesses. Okay, but this is a big first step in equal opportunity employment. Okay. All right. So in 1942, the federal government started the Bracero program. So this was a program for Mexican farm workers. They would come to the U.S. In order to harvest fruits and vegetables in the Southwest, like Texas, California, New Mexico, Arizona area. And they also wanted to get them to build railroads as well. So because of this program, more than 200,000 Mexicans are going to come into the United States in search of work. Okay, a nation on the move. So millions of Americans moved to be closer to jobs all throughout the war. And so the Sun Belt, which is depicted right here, the Sun Belt is going to be a new industrial region. Okay, so before, industry was primarily around the Great Lakes, Midwest area, on the East Coast here. This is like the most industrialized areas. But now the Sun Belt is really starting to industrialize. So the federal government allocated $1.2 billion for public housing, for schools, and for community centers in order to deal with this population shift. Now, also, as this happens, there's a lot of racism that's going to occur throughout the Sun Belt, throughout the United States in general. But African Americans are continuing with the Great Migration. Remember when we talked about the 20s, we talked about the Great Migration and how a lot of African Americans were leaving the South, moving up into cities like St. Louis, like Detroit, Detroit was a big one, Chicago. Okay, they're moving up in these areas and they're looking for more work. But once they get there, they're often confronted with suspicion and intolerance. And at this time, crimes committed by youths started to go up dramatically, and in one case became a major issue. So this is going to lead to what's known as the Zoot Suit riots. Okay, so a Zoot Suit is it's a suit that was worn by many Mexican American teens. So this right here is an example of a Zoot Suit. So it's baggy pants, the high-waisted baggy pants, and a jacket, like an overlarge jacket. And you can see him wearing that there. But there was rumors that some Mexican Americans in Zoot Suits had attacked several sailors. So soldiers went into, this is totally on their own. They were not ordered to do this, by the way, but soldiers went into Mexican American neighborhoods and attacked them. About 2,500 soldiers took it upon themselves to go do this. And they just attacked the neighborhoods. And there was big riots, and it was a big deal. But it just goes to show you that, not everybody was guilty of this. Okay, so it was a pretty bad stain on America at the time. Okay, speaking of bad stains on America, let's talk about the Japanese internment. So after Pearl Harbor, many Americans distrusted Japanese Americans because obviously they attacked Pearl Harbor, they brought us into the war. They're our main enemy in this war. It's a very common, it's a common enemy for most Americans. So mobs started to attack businesses and homes owned by Japanese Americans, and the banks wouldn't even cash their checks. Grocers wouldn't sell them food. It became a huge ordeal, and so FDR is going to issue Executive Order 9066, and basically it allows the War Department to declare any part of the U.S. a military zone. Okay, and because of that, they can take anybody from that zone if they need to. And so basically the War Department said, okay, the whole West Coast is a military zone. And it ordered all people of Japanese ancestry to 10 different internment camps. Most of them were located in the West, but there were some, as far as the Midwest. I'll show you a map here in a second. And many people lost their homes and their businesses as a result because they just removed them. Okay, and so if they were gone in these internment camps, they couldn't pay their mortgages. And so they couldn't pay off their business loans. And so what happened is the banks would foreclose on them. And then when they got back, somebody else is living in their house. Somebody else has opened a new business where their business was. Okay, so this was a major, major deal. So this right here shows the different internment camps. And you can see that they go, as far as Kansas almost here, but there's a different one. This one here, Manzanar, is the one probably the most famous because of the book Farewell to Manzanar, in which a girl depicts, she talks about her life in the internment camps. Okay, but this entire area, everything pink here, this was the exclusion area. So what that means is this is where Japanese Americans were taken from, and you can tell all of California. And there's a lot of cities in this area here, especially LA, San Francisco, big cities that a lot of Japanese Americans had lived. And so a lot of people were taken to these internment camps. Okay. So Korematsu v. United States. So Fred Korematsu, that's this guy here. He argued that his rights had been violated in 1944 when he was taken to one of these concentration camps. And so the Supreme Court ruled that relocation was constitutional because it was based on military urgency, not based on race, based on military urgency, even though only one race was actually being taken. And so shortly later, the Supreme Court ruled in ex parte endo. Ex parte means the former party, and then endo was the guy who was suing, that Americans can't be held against their will. Okay, that violates basic constitutional rights like habeas corpus and things of that nature. So eventually, Korematsu will win in the end. Okay, but in this entire time, no Japanese American was ever tried for espionage or for sabotage. Many actually served as translators, and so they contributed to the war effort on behalf of the United States. Japanese American Citizen League, or the JACL, also tried to help people who lost their property because people, like I said, they would go back to their home and there's some other family living there. Can you imagine that? You leave, you're forced out of your home, and then somebody else has taken it over. Everything you worked for is gone, and that's what they were facing. All right, so daily life in wartime. So FDR created new agencies to deal with wartime issues. So his biggest issue was inflation. So the Office of Price Administration, or the OPA, was created to regulate wages and the price of farm products. The Office of Economic Administration, the OES, was regulated other prices. And then the War Labor Board prevented strikes that would endanger the war effort. So if because labor was at such a shortage, the workers had a little more um, a little more leverage, and so they could use that to try to get more money. Well, the problem is if they're doing that, some of these businesses go out of business. That disrupts the production of war materials and other things. So that's what the War Labor Board was trying to fight, and that's what this poster here is trying to convey: is that everybody's in it together. Okay, we're all in it together. We're all strong. We're stronger together. Let's keep them firing. Make those tanks and those planes so we can win this war. All right. So rationing is basically the limiting of availability of products. So raw materials and supplies that were needed for war were limited, and what you would get is you would get a ration book. So this is an example right here of a ration book. It would be sent to you, and then you can they're basically coupons that you could exchange for different things. But each family would get a ration book every month. And then families could exchange things like bacon grease, meat drippings for more coupons because those fats and oils are actually really important when they're creating explosives. So they're used in bombs and stuff. And then families, to kind of supplement some of the food, they would plant victory gardens. So these are just gardens. They just called them victory gardens, but these are just gardens that people had at their houses where they would plant different like fruits and vegetables or whatever to supplement some of that. So one, their family is eating, but also so that they're not taking away from some food that needs to go off to the war. And then to pay for the war, the government did two things. First thing is they raised taxes, which always happens. But the second thing they did is they started to sell more bonds. So e-bonds were sold to Americans to help pay for the war. And so basically Americans, through bonds, loan money to the government. And then the government pays it back, like after the bond matures, you can pay it back. You can like cash it in, and you can get like your money back plus some interest. And it's usually very low, unless it's matured. So you get your money back once it's matured. If you try to get your money back before it's matured, you won't get all your money back. You'll get a portion of it. Okay. End of the Great Depression. So this is something that a lot of people kind of falsely believe, that World War II ended the Great Depression. So economists almost unilaterally agree that the Depression did not end, or World War II did not end the Great Depression. However, there were about 19 million jobs that were created during the war, but government spending did not end the Depression. Basically what it did is it artificially boosted the economy. Okay, the government pumped all kinds of money into the economy, into factory jobs, and to create tanks and planes and all these war materials that we need. But the problem is you can tell that it doesn't end because the standard of living doesn't rise. Okay, the federal debt soars, and we're still to this day continuing to pay off that debt. And the government spending, basically, the idea is that government spending does not create economic recovery. Okay, so when they raise taxes, when they artificially boost production, that all that money gets drained from the private sector. And so what that means is that normal people, they're paying more money to the government, so they don't have as much money to spend on things that they need, like a refrigerator or like a car or just groceries or anything like that. There's normal stuff that you buy, clothes, shoes, things of that nature. And so no jobs are actually being created. No long-lasting jobs are actually being created because what was happening is basically temporary jobs are being created to pay for the war. So the question is what did end the Depression? Well, actually what happened is the Depression probably doesn't actually end until 1948. But after the war, the government reduced spending dramatically. It was the largest drop in U.S. history on spending. And this happens mostly with Eisenhower, and then it continues with President Kennedy. But they lowered taxes, and all that money allowed more money in the private sector. And once that happened, is people started to invest in the stock market again. People started buying homes and cars again. And actually, what they found is that they were actually bringing in more money with lower taxes than they were with the higher taxes because people were spending more money. So they were getting more money on sales taxes and on like property taxes and things like that. So by lowering taxes, they actually gained more money for the government, which is pretty interesting. So, all right, so that's all I got for you guys today. I hope you guys have a good rest of the day. Don't forget to do your processor. See you later.